For this video, we're going to discuss the setup and layout for your book's cover. Now, before we begin on the cover, there's some important information that you need to have access to and a couple of things that you need to have already finished. The first thing you need to have access to is your book cover info. This cover info will give you a synopsis, an author bio, and a brief blurb about the book. All three parts of this need to appear somewhere on the layout of your book's cover. Specifically, all three parts need to be on the book cover that has the 4-inch flaps on either side. Remember, you're designing two different book covers. For the second book cover, the book cover that's 6 by 9 without the flaps, I will allow you to remove any one thing from this design. For example, on my book covers layout with the flaps, I've included the author's bio inside of one of the flaps. But when I go to create the 6 by 9 design, I'm going to remove the biographic information and only keep the synopsis and the blurb about my book. So remember, you're doing two book covers. The one with the flap needs to have all three parts of the information, and the book cover design without flaps, you can remove any one of the three parts of the information. The next thing we need to determine is the width of your spine. In order to do this, we need to know how many pages your inside book is going to take up. Now, if you're not finished laying out the inside pages, that's okay, but at least have a good start to it. You should be able to open up your book's layout and go to the Pages panel. Inside the Pages panel, simply scroll to the very bottom and find out the last number of pages that you have. Even if this number changes, adding a few more or less pages later on, that's okay. This is simply a rough estimate and a good starting point for this exercise. So take some time now and open up your book's layout document and scroll to the very bottom and find that page number. Once you find the page number, let's go to the printing website of lulu.com. Under the Create tab, click on Print Book. From here, we can determine that we're going to do a standard paperback, and when you scroll down, you can choose the US trade size. It's going to be a 6 by 9 book. When you scroll down a little farther, you can type in the number of pages that you need right here. For my book, it was 486 pages. Once I type this in, not only can you see the cost per book, but you can open up your spine measurements, and I can see my spine width is going to be 1.094 inches. This is important information to know because I'm going to use this later on to determine the width of my spine. So make sure you write this down and have this information handy before we get started, because when we start adding it on, it'll make it much easier to create. Now, the last thing that you're going to need before we get started is any visual research that you want to add to your book's cover, layout, and design. Your design is obviously going to look different from mine. So for this video, I'm not really going to talk about the design of your cover, but much rather how to lay out and set up the documents that we're working in. I'm primarily going to use Photoshop as the starting point and layout for my design, but later on I'm going to bring everything into InDesign and complete out the rest of the text and body copy. If you want to include hand-drawn elements or elements from Adobe Illustrator, you can do so as well for the layout of this. Just know, whatever you turn in will be generating a PDF from Adobe InDesign, so make sure everything is compatible and can be saved within here. I highly recommend at least laying out the beginning stages of your document for your cover in Photoshop first, then pulling everything into InDesign at the end, as I've explicitly stated in my instructions. So let's get started. I'm going to close this out and go into Photoshop first. What I want to do is to do a rough layout of all of my elements using Photoshop. You can see here I've already got my final product, but let me show you how to start. We're going to go up to File, down to New, and create a new document. The size of this document is going to be measured in inches. The width of it is going to be 6 inches wide and 9 inches tall. The resolution needs to be high at 300 pixels per inch. We're going to stay in RGB color mode, and we're going to set our background contents to be white and say Create. Now this is going to give us the front of our cover. Notice that it's still a simple 6 by 9. Now we need to add on the other elements of the spine and the back. Before we do, we also need to drag on any kind of guidelines to indicate where the edges of each part are going to be. In order to turn your guides on, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Let's look at our rulers. If you don't see your rulers at the top and the left-hand side of your page, go up to View, down to Rulers. You can see they're up there now. All I'm going to do is to click on my top ruler and drag down and create a ruler at the top. Let's create another one at the bottom. Let's do one at the left and the right-hand side of my page. Now when I start to add on more, this will easily indicate where the edges of each part are going to be. Now let's add the spine to our book. We want to extend our document's canvas size to the left-hand side. In order to do this, go up to Image, down to Canvas Size. From here, make sure Relative is checked on, and the anchor point we're going to work in is going to be the one on the very far right middle. This will expand our document to the left. As far as the width goes, this width is going to be the spine width that we determined from lulu.com. So let's go back to the website, and I'm going to copy this number. Command C. And I'm going to place it within the width. Command V. When we expand it out, I want to know where that new expansion is going to be. So change your canvas color to gray. When we say OK, this will expand my canvas to the left, and it'll make that new part be gray. Let's add a new guideline. Click on the left and drag it to that point as well. Now let's add a back cover to it. Going back up to Image, down to Canvas Size. Again, we're going to choose Relative and make sure the middle right-hand side is selected. And the width of this is going to be the same as my front cover of 6. Change our canvas size now back to white. And we'll say OK to that. And now you can see I've added the white of the back to it. Now I can quickly and easily distinguish between all parts of it. Let's click and drag another guideline. I'll zoom out a little bit so we can see the whole thing. The next part we need to add are some 4-inch flaps on either side of our book. To do this, go up to Image and Canvas Size. This time, since we're adding it to both the left and the right side, keep Relative checked on and keep the center anchor point selected. Now when we choose a width of 8 inches, this will add 4 inches on either side. And let's change our canvas color back to gray and say OK. And now you can see I've added some gray 4-inch flaps on either side. Again, let's choose our guidelines and add some guidelines to both sides there. The last thing that we need to add to our document setup in Photoshop is going to be a bleed margin around all sides of this. Since most bleed is always 1/8 of an inch, what we really need to do is to add 1/4 of an inch to our entire document. Dividing 1/4 over the entire area will leave 1/8 of an inch on all sides. So to do this, let's go back up to Image and Canvas Size one more time. This time, keeping it relative and on the center anchor point, we're going to add 0.25 inches on all sides, the width and the height. And we're going to extend our canvas color to another color. And this time, let's just choose kind of a dark blue, something that will contrast. When we say OK, and then OK again, you can see now how it adds a nice blue edge all the way around our entire document. From here, now we've got a good starting point to lay out all the different elements for our book. Just know that you can add whatever you want to for your design. For me, I like to start off with a textured background, do all of my text inside of here any kind of images, hand-drawn elements, whatever that I need. What I do not want to add in Photoshop is any large body copy. Body copy, including the author's bio or the blurbs or the synopsis, is best handled in InDesign. So for now, I'm going to jump ahead and include all of my elements for the front and the spine and the back of the cover, but I'm not going to include any body copy for my design. All right, now that I've got the basic layout for my book cover's image design, I'm going to save this as a Photoshop document. So let's go to File, down to Save As. I'm going to call this my Jane Eyre book cover. Keep the format as a Photoshop document. I'm going to save mine to the desktop. Keeping it as a Photoshop document allows me to have all of my layers, and we'll maximize the compatibility and say OK to that. Once this is done, I can close this out and then jump into InDesign. So let's go down to InDesign and create a new document. File, New Document. Now the size of my document needs to be determined based on the size of my final Photoshop document. So in InDesign, I'm going to change my units over to inches, but let's jump back to Photoshop. And with this document open, I can go to Image, Image Size, and this will be the size of my InDesign document. So the width is 21.343 and the height is 9.25. So let's jump back into InDesign. The width here, 21.343, and the height is 9.25. The width of your document is going to be different based on the number of pages in your book's layout. So do not type in this number thinking it's going to be correct. As far as the rest of the details, we really only need one page, and it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be facing pages. So I'm going to uncheck that, and we won't worry about anything else. I will set my columns back to 1. And as far as the margins go, they don't have to have any margins, so we'll set 0 on all sides. And it doesn't have to have any bleed set up, so we'll do 0 on all of this, since we've included bleed within our image size. When we say Create, we've now got a document the exact size that we can place our Photoshop document into. To do this, I'm going to grab my Rectangle Frame tool and draw a rectangular frame that goes over the entire width and height of your document. With it selected, we can go up to File and place our new document inside of it. So there's our Jane Eyre book cover. We'll say Open, and here it is placed nicely in here. The next thing I need to do is to be able to pull on some of my guidelines and make sure they're in the same place as all of the others that were on Photoshop. The next thing we need to add to our InDesign document are all of the vertical guides indicating where our bleed, flaps, and front and back cover are going to be. Keep in mind that your spine is going to be kind of a variable, but we can still determine the edges of it working from one side to the other. Here's how to do that. Make sure your rulers are turned on, and let's zoom in to the far left-hand side. The first rule that we need to drag out, so clicking on the ruler and dragging over, is to place one at 0.125 inches. So this is the first bleed setting. The next one is going to add a 4-inch flap to it. So clicking on the ruler, drag it over to 4.125 inches and let go. And then the next guideline should add 6 inches for our back cover. So that will be 10.125 inches. Again, the 3 guidelines that you need to work with are going to be an eighth of an inch, 0.125, 4.125, and 10.125. Now let's go over to the far right-hand side. To make things simpler, I'm going to choose the point right between the 2 crosshairs of your rulers, clicking and dragging and bringing that over to this far right-hand side. That will reposition my ruler 0 point to right there. Now when I click and drag, I can add a vertical ruler right at -0.125. Then I can click and drag again and negative 4.125. And then finally, negative 10.125. When I zoom out, you can see now I've got my front, back, and flap guidelines exactly where they need to be. And this will help indicate where I need to place all of my text within my design. The final thing I would encourage you to do is to add a little bit of a margin to your design. You never want to have any of your text elements too close to the edge of your cover, and especially to the edges that are going to get trimmed off. Think about your cover's design in terms of front, side, and back. It's a three-dimensional object, so you can have elements flowing from one side to the other. Now, here you can see from my cover's design how I've treated all of the type and even some decorative elements. I've added lines, I've added squares and outlines to it. I've even added drop caps, but I've kept everything nice and consistent within the design of my book layout and cover design. The last thing that you're going to do is to export this as a PDF. Once you have everything done, of course, we can go up to File and we can save our document. So I'm going to call this the Final Book Cover with Flaps because I've added the 4-inch flaps. Once the InDesign file is saved, go up to File, down to Export. Make sure the format you're choosing is a print PDF, and we'll choose Save. And we're only going to save the one page, but do not turn on any marks or bleeds for this one. We've already included the bleed settings. All we want to do is to print off a proof of it. So choosing to export. If there's any overset text or problems, it may give you this. You can go back and fix it, but I'll just say OK. And this PDF is what you're going to upload to Moodle and also print off as the test cover for your design. Now remember, you're doing two different book covers. In this video, I've shown you how to set up a book cover that includes the flaps. For the next exercise, do the same thing, but do not include the flaps. Simply keep the same setup as far as the size of your book, but don't include 4 inches on either side. There should be a separate InDesign file for your book cover layout without flaps, and also save that as a PDF to upload to Moodle that has no flaps as well.